Hey everyone, welcome back to the layout once again. Today is going to be, I think, a fun little video because we're going to do a tour over the whole layout. So here's a perspective that you don't often get, but I'm coming down the basement stairs and this is the entrance to the layout. So we're sort of looking at the back side of some of the scenes here. Can't get the camera to focus, of course. So there's still some things to finish up out here. The drop bridge, for example, doesn't have any fascia on it. I need to do a light block, another sort of piece of fascia on this side. But the upper level here is not removable or anything, so you just sort of duck under, and then we enter the layout room. So there are two main aisles, the one that I'm standing in, and I'll try to turn around here so you can see the scenes up here. I'll try not to turn too quickly for those who get motion sick, but there's this aisle here. This is the one that you enter into once you enter the room here. And then if we continue on this way, we'll swing over to the other aisle of the railroad, and that's pretty much it. There's not too much to show in terms of I guess like square footage. It's not a huge room. It's about 12 feet wide for part of it, and then 28 feet long, including the staging room that we'll go into back here. And for much of the room, it's only 10 feet wide. So it's not a huge space, but there's enough room that we can get a pretty good mainline run in HO scale. So back here is what I call the staging room still, because originally there were going to be two staging yards back here, but I have since scrapped those plans, and what took their place were a couple of reverse loops. There's one up here at the very top of the layout, and there's one down here, a less traditional reverse loop. It's more like a giant Y. It's that lower portion that swings over there, which is kind of hard to see. So we'll glance at that a little bit later, but this room's pretty ugly, so we're not going to dwell in here too long. So now it's time to talk about actual scenes on the layout. As I've already mentioned, this is Whitefish, Montana down here on the lower level. So the lower level, as you can guess, is modeling Montana, and specifically the Highline subdivision, and even more specifically, sort of the western slope of Marias Pass. So the very westernmost portion of the Highline subdivision, which also just happens to be the very westernmost portion of my railroad. So Whitefish, Montana is sort of the center of operations on that subdivision, as well as my layout, because there is not a large yard, but a somewhat significant yard where there is some switching, but mostly I think it's used to stage trains. There's some arrival departure tracks, and it's used for crew changes and things like that, much like I use it on my railroad. So I've mentioned a couple times that this is the westernmost portion of my railroad, which means, if you didn't piece that together yet, that when we're looking this way, when we're looking right, that is west, if that makes sense. And if we're looking to the left, we're facing east. So anytime you're facing the backdrop, you're effectively facing railroad south. And that's because the grade always climbs eastbound. So the grade climbs this way to the left, which is east, and that works out just perfectly because the Highline subdivision on the lower level, at least the side that we're modeling, climbs eastbound as it approaches Marias Pass. The upper level will be the same, as we'll talk about. But specifically about the yard, there's not much going on. There's a main line and siding out front. There are 3 bowl tracks to do a bit of classification and switching, and then the 3 in the back are the longest tracks, and those are arrival departure. And the last bit of significance here in Whitefish is the engine facility. So as we move here to the east end of the yard, we have an engine facility with 4 tracks. So if you look at the actual Whitefish yard on a map, you'll see the yard is more or less laid out in the same way, except everything's sort of inverted in terms of east-west direction. But this is the little bit of track work that I still have left on the layout. There's one other little spur that I need to extend, but otherwise everything in terms of track is complete. Alright, so we're leaving Whitefish now, and just about where those locomotives are sitting is where the grade starts. So we continue east this way. We're coming up about a 1%, maybe 1.2% grade, and we just kind of come along the wall there. It's a very narrow 4 or so inch wide shelf, and then we come across the doorway, the entrance to the layout. When we come up here and we enter our first turn back curve, and if you remember from earlier, if we take a peek back here, you'll see that track that sort of strays off that way and goes through the wall down there is the lower level reverse loop. And then the important part of walking this way is to show you Columbia Falls. This is the major industrial area on the layout, and it's just about 5 or so miles east of Whitefish on the prototype, where there are a number of industries. Although not prototypically accurate for the actual Columbia Falls, Montana, I have a couple of industries here that are just sort of non-representative of industries there. I have a warehouse. It's currently unnamed and unfinished. We have a transload facility out front here, you can see, to service tank cars. If we pan to the left, all the way down at the other end of Columbia Falls is a brewery, and this is sort of a fantasy version of the Great Northern Brewery located in Whitefish. So I'm sort of pretending that they have a distribution, a rail-served distribution center at Columbia Falls, and that's what we're modeling here. So I don't want to sound like a broken record pointing out that this track here that swings off the main line is the lower level reverse loop, because I've already mentioned that a number of times now. That's how it functions on the layout. But what's really interesting is that on the prototype at Columbia Falls, there is a track that swings off to the south and to the west and becomes the Kalispell subdivision. So visually, that's what I'm trying to represent here. This is a subdivision, sort of a branch line that operates between Columbia Falls here and Kalispell, which is a little to the south of Columbia Falls, and basically just switches all the industries. And until recently, as of like April of this year, I think, it was operated by the Mission Mountain Railroad, and the line changed hands once again and is now back in control of BNSF. So if it ever switches hands back to the Watco company, I think it'd be really cool to actually model that and have some Mission Mountain locomotives work the interchange over here between Columbia Falls and Whitefish maybe. So we've come around the other side of the peninsula now. Just on the other side of the backdrop over there is where Great Northern Brewery was that we were just looking at. And this scene over here is not going to represent any particular town or spot on the railroad, more or less just the space or the run between Columbia Falls and West Glacier, Montana. So this is sort of just the western approach to Maria's Pass. What we'll have here in front of us originally was going to be a road, as you can see, but I've since changed my mind. That bridge, which we've had built forever, is actually going to go here, and we're going to have a cool sort of low-lying river over here, or a shallow river is what I was trying to say. And I think that'll be great just because there's so much depth to this scene. If you're shooting perpendicularly to the tracks, so you're getting a cool bridge shot, there's going to be a lot of scenery behind it because of the width of the peninsula at that point. And it's just going to be straight scenery through here for the most part. As we look to the left there, it's just going to be more trees and great opportunity for some nice straight running, great photos, and hopefully some cool videos too. And once again, now we're looking through that hole, which again will eventually be a backdrop. But for right now, you can see pretty well that this main line here continues up the grade, again around maybe 1.67% here, and it goes into the staging room through the wall there. Except instead of this one being a reverse loop, let's follow it here, it is sort of the transition level. So when it comes back here into the staging room, it's that middle level there. And it's basically, if you want to think about it this way, this is like the helix run between levels, because if you follow it this way, when it comes back out into the main room, we are now on the lower level. So it's sort of arbitrary to decide where the upper and lower level starts, but that's sort of the transition between locations on the railroad. And through the magical passage of time and space, we're on not only the upper level, but we're now somehow in Nebraska. So it's a little weird that we jumped from Montana to Nebraska, but from the get-go, I wanted to model 2 different subdivisions on the layout because I thought that'd be kind of a cool undertaking. So Crawford up here is important because it is the home base for manned helper operations, which is really sort of the whole catalyst for this layout existing. I thought, man, manned helpers are going to be great. That's super cool. I want to model that, and in order to make that happen, I needed enough mainline run to be able to run significantly sized road freights with big 6-axle power. So the whole layout sort of justifies the manned helper operations over here in Crawford. So here we can see a couple of EMDs sitting as a helper set in the helper pocket at Crawford, just as they do on the prototype. And then in the background there you'll see West Plains grain. That is an actual elevator in Crawford. It's not at all finished, so it's kind of ugly right now. I've pulled it apart, it's in all sorts of pieces, the details aren't there, and it hasn't even been painted yet. So keep in mind that that's just sort of a rough representation. And we pan this way, you'll see this is probably the most complete scene. Not probably, it's definitely the most complete scene on the layout. I have a photo backdrop along the back edge of the scene, and all sorts of vegetation, and for the most part I have the ballast installed as well. I'll just take a second to pan down this way so you can see the backdrop along the street. That still needs a bit of touch up around the light features there. I need to trim the paper away just a bit. And now once we get past Annan Street right here, that's actually not what's represented in the backdrop. If you do some digging you'll find out that is 2nd Street in Crawford, but what this represents is actually Annan Street. Doesn't matter, little details I don't think most people will notice. As we come this way, you'll see still mostly complete scenery. Down in this corner, this is where it starts to sort of fall apart, and I have not finished the ballast down here, nor have I gotten all of the vegetation in. And right about here is where Crawford effectively ends, and this is where the climb begins for Crawford Hill. So this is why we need helpers, because right about here where this UP reefer is, the grade resumes once again, and now we're working with a pretty steep grade here. The prototype is 1.5%. To make it worth it on my layout, I sort of compressed the space, and therefore the grade is about 2.5% for most of the climb. Exiting the lower horseshoe curve, we come up once again this very narrow shelf here along the wall. You'll see the wall up above needs a bit of touch-up work where that seam is, and this portion of the climb is probably the easiest. It's not too steep, it's actually probably closer to about 2% grade, and then we get some curvature here, and you can't see it on the video, but there's sort of a bit of a sag in the grade, and then all of a sudden it resumes once again. And when we turn this way, you'll see this is one of the more dramatic scenes on the layout. This is the upper horseshoe curve at what is called white clay. So this is white clay over here, the near track is white clay siding, the track in the background is the main line. The real Crawford Hill is a 2-track main line. I didn't have room for that on my layout, so we're pretending that it's a single track railroad. And you can see I do have a bit of scenery done down here. I don't really want to call it done because there's still a lot to add to it. Namely ballast, grass tufts, bushes, more trees. There's definitely not enough trees yet, but it at least looks like something. So this is as I said, the upper horseshoe curve, and then we enter the big rock cuts. Here's one of them. We've got a bit of a grade crossing there, and then another significant rock cut. And as we turn this way, this is where white clay siding ends. And this is a kind of a cool scene, I think. So we got another rock cut, and then this dirt road that sort of hugs the hillside here, and if we get really high, disappears into the backdrop up there. So I'm still working on this scene. Obviously I'm working on all of it, but a lot more grass detail to add, and bushes and lots of trees, hopefully to hide that road up at the top. This spot up here, as we come around the curve at the end of the peninsula, is called Breezy Point. Which, I mean, you can probably guess why. It's sort of on the railroad, it sort of falls off this cliff here, which is probably why it's called Breezy Point. It's quite windy up there, I'd imagine. So it's pretty close to the edge on my railroad as well, but that's not too far off from the prototype. Another rock cut here, and now we're getting into the portion of scenery that I just started working on yesterday. So all this grass is brand new that you see up here. So we come around the curve at Breezy Point, and I forgot to mention, but the track up here sort of levels out. So around the curve it's sort of flat. The horseshoe curve that I showed you, that upper horseshoe curve that we were standing in just a second ago, that's all upgrade. I guess you could call it a horseshoe curve, but it's sort of the opposite direction. Up here, this is flat. But if you look, if we glance off that way, towards Belmont, the grade resumes once again, just for this short little spurt up to the summit. So we come through another significant rock cut there. And you can kind of see that vertical curve in the track work right about where that maintenance of way vehicle is. The grade levels out once again. And this is the very top of the layout. This is Summit at Belmont, Nebraska, which once again, that's how it works on the prototype as well. Trains start in Crawford, off to the left there. They put on their helpers, and then they work their way all the way up to the grade at Belmont, and then they release the helpers so that they can drift back down the grade. And on the prototype, there are no operating tunnels, but there is one rail tunnel in the entire state of Nebraska, and that is Belmont Tunnel. So what I have modeled here is the north portal of Belmont Tunnel, and I'm pretending that it's still in operation. So we have one leg of the upper reverse loop going into it there. The other leg, of course, goes through the wall over there to the left, and we're going to hide that with that overpass, as well as some vegetation and a few other tricks that I have up my sleeve. So we'll see how that turns out. But this is where the grass work sort of stops. You'll see I still have some dirt and stuff to install up there. And really quick, let's once again take a trip into the staging room, and you'll see this is how that upper reverse loop works. The tunnel portion leads out over there and comes back over here, and if you were to enter the tunnel, then you would exit here where this overpass is, and then head down the grade that way. And eventually, if you went all the way in the opposite direction, you would ultimately wind back up in Whitefish Yard. Well everyone, that concludes our tour of the layout. That is all I've got for this video. I hope you really enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, if I left anything out, be sure to leave your questions down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And one final closing thought, I think it might be kind of cool to go back and watch that cab ride video that I uploaded a few months ago. That should be popping up on your screen right now, so maybe click on that and ride around the layout from the engineer's perspective. Not something you have to do, not trying to self-promote my own videos, but I just really think it might be sort of a fun thing to check out now that this tour is sort of fresh in your mind. But again, that's all I've got, so as always, thanks so much for watching, stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.